There are a great deal of moving parts this offseason as a ton of blockbuster names are surrounded to trade rumors or free agency rumors, and it feels like the Sixers are at the epicenter of a good deal of it. But in this video, I did want to shine a little bit of light on the possibility of the Sixers being able to poach OG Anunoby from the New York Knicks and why I think I might have found the route to make this possible. Now, we got this initial report from Ian Begley that said the Sixers could be targeting OG Anunoby, saying, quote, as previously reported, members of the Philadelphia 76ers had seen Anunoby as an offseason target. Paul George is also a target for Philadelphia, but if the Sixers can't get George, I could see them making a big offer to Anunoby, if for no other reason than it would force New York to match the money. Now, I do think the Sixers and Daryl Morey specifically will be involved in these types of talks with a little bit of that give and take, that positive, where either OG can accept this deal or you're pushing the Knicks to pay him more money than they're probably comfortable to do. Now, I like OG Anunoby. I wouldn't consider him the top of my board for the missing piece, but I do want to speak to where my mindset has shifted and why I see value on getting one in the hand, where you do have that one player that you do know you have. That it feels like right now there's so much uncertainty, all these players revolving, that you can bring in a guy like OG, which keeps this long-term flexibility, a little more youth, and the type of production that he can bring to the team. That you did see the impact that he made on this Knicks team, and I still think that it is more likely than not that he does end up in a Knicks uniform next year, but I do think there's a route where New York may have their eyes on upgrading to a certain other Villanova star that I am excited to get to dive into. Now, with the OG talk specifically, I kind of considered it a closed door until I saw this report from Jake Fisher here. And he writes about OG, this particularly speaking from the Sixers perspective here, saying Harris, by all accounts, is not expected to be back with the Sixers after a tenuous end to his Philadelphia tenure. To fill that two-way max salary slot Harris was once expected to uphold, only OG Anunoby would represent an option close to George's prowess and close to representing a top-tier third star who can test the open market. Anunoby is widely expected to decline his $19.9 million player option for next season after being dealt to New York before the trade deadline. Of note, while league personnel are out of the mind Siakam will certainly be re-signing with Indiana, there was word circling among team officials at last week's NBA draft combine that Anunoby's situation with the Knicks is not as cut and dried. Perhaps those signals to rival teams will only help Anunoby elicit a larger dollar figure from the Knicks, but various teams left Chicago with the belief that Anunoby could reach unrestricted free agency and consider deals from other franchises in addition to New York, sources said. So in my mind, I think OG Anunoby is just about perfect for what the Knicks need him to be, that he is this hard-nosed, tough defender. He is not a guy that he has his limitations from creation ability on the offensive end, and to dive into specifically what he brings from a statistical perspective here, that during his just 23 games that he played with the Knicks, 14.1 points per game, 1.5 assists, 4.4 rebounds, 1.7 steals, 1.0 blocks, shot 39.4% on 4.5 three-point attempts, and when speaking from his career as a whole, a 12-point per game scorer, 4.3 rebounds, 1.6 assists, has shot 37.6% from three on 4.4 attempts per game. He has shown some notable improvement pretty much year in and year out. That 22-23 season is his best, where he was in the Defensive Player of the Year mix with a league-leading 1.9 steals per game, also added 16.8 points, 5.0 rebounds, 2.0 assists, still shot 38.7% from three that season. That you can see the type of player that he is. I don't think OG's a number one. I don't think OG is number two, but I do think he can be a high-caliber number three, and we kind of saw that put fully to the test and fully on display in a Knicks uniform. I also give him a ton of respect for suiting up and playing in that Game 7 when it was clear he was not healthy or could not truly move with that hamstring. Ultimately, the Knicks did have to shut him down, but that was a cool moment to me that I do give him a ton of respect for. Now, the missing piece here and where this all comes together in my mind, it brings in that other New York franchise, the Brooklyn Nets. And they are a team perhaps more in purgatory than just about any other NBA team. That I think the clear option and the clear outlook for that team should be you got to take some steps back, blow it up, and begin to rebuild. And at the forefront of that conversation is Mikal Bridges. Now, I did see some mock trades flying around connecting the Sixers to Mikal Bridges specifically. This coming from, I believe this was Bleacher Report here. The Nets receiving Ricky Council IV, Terquavion Smith, a 2024 first-round pick, so this year, and a 2026 first-round pick for Mikal Bridges. I don't think that would be nearly enough to get a deal done, to be perfectly honest. And while I would love Bridges for that to be perfectly the case, I do think that's where this all ties together. That I think from the Knicks perspective, we know the Villanova connection. We know the Josh Hart, Jalen Brunson, Dante DiVincenzo. Mikal Bridges seems to be the missing piece, and that would be a squad that could fully unite. Now, if you are looking to upgrade from OG Anunoby, I do think Mikal Bridges could be that one piece that the Knicks could look to do that for, and that's where I think the door could open. So in this situation, the Sixers could outright just sign OG Anunoby, or it might be in everyone's best interest and certainly would be easier and preferable from the Knicks, or if you can work this into a type of sign and trade. So that's when I got in the lab and cooked this up right here, that my trade that I have, a sign and trade 3-team deal between the Sixers, Nets, and Knicks here. The Sixers walking away with OG Anunoby on a 4-year, $45 million deal that would be about the max for him. The Nets are getting Paul Reed, which helped with the salary situation here, and then 4 first-round picks in return for the Mikal Bridges here. 3 of those first-round picks coming from the Knicks, 1 from the Sixers, and the Sixers also tossing 1 to New York, and New York walking away with Mikal Bridges there. So in this situation, that the Sixers get their guy in OG Anunoby. The Knicks get their guy in Mikal Bridges. And the Nets successfully blow it up in a way that they do add draft picks and begin to rebuild in a way that I think is just necessary for the organization. And by the way, there were some telling quotes coming postseason from the front office out there in Brooklyn, basically saying that we have to take a hard look in the mirror. And why I think this works from the Sixers' perspective here is you're having the Knicks do the heavy lifting. That this is a deal that they need to push to get done. And frankly, they could use the help to make sure that is the case. That you're not losing on your investment with OG as you do recoup the assets. You do get to upgrade and bring in a guy like Mikal Bridges. From the Sixers' perspective, what this is about to me is you lock a guy in stone. That you now have OG Anunoby. And this leaves the window to potentially upgrade that. And for example, why I bring that in is I want to bring in this other part of the Jake Fisher report for why this is valuable. It says, and the wrong part here, and it says the Sixers, sources said, took note of Indiana's 2-year splurge for Bruce Brown that the team that then became the biggest salary heading back to Toronto in exchange for Siakam. Veteran wings like Klay Thompson and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope would fall on the Sixers' list of targets for similar 1+1 contracts, sources said. Striking out on a big-time wing would also leave the door open for Philadelphia to consider taking back a player such as Zach LaVine, sources said, in the event Chicago or another team is willing to attach draft capital to move off salary. Kyle Kuzma will be another advanced wing player on the trade market, although Washington's asking price for the veteran scorer prior to February's trade deadline was too rich for most rival teams. So the biggest thing that I do want to note there is these first 2 lines, saying that the Sixers, sources said, took note of Indiana's 2-year splurge for Bruce Brown that then became the biggest salary heading back to Toronto in exchange for Siakam. That is where the greatest appeal with OG Anunoby comes into me, is that you have this salary on the books. For all that is great about this flexibility, this cap space that Daryl Morey is talking about, it does hamstring you a little for your ability to manipulate and make trades. And yes, there are instances for which you can trade into salary cap, particularly in the offseason where you can make things work. But by having a dollar figure and a attractive player like OG Anunoby, it gives Sixers the baseline to be at the forefront of a deal. That I think a large part of why the Sixers have missed out on some of these trades, like the initial OG Anunoby trade, like the initial Pascal Siakam trade, is in both situations that Toronto wanted a bit of a win-now player in return. You can have that in OG Anunoby that still might not have played his best basketball. So say the Jimmy Butler situation plays out, that he goes through this offseason, he's still going through his process with the Miami Heat down there, not getting the contract that he truly desires. He ultimately steps back on the floor, and Jimmy Butler starts Jimmy Butlering, that he is causing a fuss, causing a stir. All of a sudden, I want out. You're either paying me or getting me out of here. And Miami says, fine. OG Anunoby would absolutely be a Miami Heat player and fit quite well in that archetype that they would ask him to be. So in this situation, the Sixers would be in the forefront, in the lead, and could absolutely make that swap for Jimmy Butler, in my mind. And by the way, with this sign and trade, that the Sixers still have a couple of draft picks to work with. This is not emptying all the assets to bring in OG. This is a situation where you tossed in 2 first, you have at least 2 that you can still trade, and a little bit more to manipulate with pick swaps and every other and situations like that. So I do think that this would give the Sixers the forefront, the lead in that type of situation. And by the way, Jimmy Butler, not the only situation that this applies to. Brandon Ingram, another one. Or the next up-and-coming frustrated star, maybe Donovan Mitchell in Cleveland, that the Sixers could provide a team with a baseline, a guy to kickstart a rebuild. That is something that they could not currently offer. And by doing something like this, they could make that this case. And worst case scenario, You go into the season with OG Anunoby as your third star. And while OG has his flaws, he is not the perfect basketball player. It still trends toward an identity that I want this Sixers team to embrace. That he's hard-nosed. He'll be the best perimeter defender that this team has had since Jimmy Butler. He's a guy that can still score, will play hard, will get rebounds, will compete. He's a hard-nosed, tough player that I think is infectious and brings a personality this team needs. He's a little bit younger, that when diving into the age specifically, he will be approaching his age 27 season, so really just getting into the prime of his basketball career, and maybe that is the missing piece. You get a chance to sit back, identify, and see if that trio works. So if that opportunity presents itself, if the Knicks and that breakdown between them and OG has them their sights set on that last Villanova star, which I think is far more likely than I've heard people talk about, I think the Sixers could find themselves in a position to be the beneficiary of that. I think they could set themselves up for both short-term and long-term success. So at this point in time, my worst-case scenario is the Sixers walk away with nothing. That all this talk about Paul George, all this talk about Jimmy Butler, that the worst-case scenario for the Sixers team is to not get a big swing guy. That Jake mentions that in this article, speaking towards that's when things shift toward overpaying for the role players, the Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, the Klay Thompson, in hopes that that turns into something. Well, OG Anunoby is as sure of a bet that I believe could either turn into something or be the player that they're ultimately missing overall. So in my mind, this would be a win-win for the Sixers. You're improving your team, you're opening up more flexibility in the future, and you might stumble along the missing piece in the process by OG straight up being that guy. So we'll see how things shake out from here, but I do want to hear from you guys in the comments what you think of that idea. Would you be willing to poach OG Anunoby from the New York Knicks? Would you be intrigued by him as the third option, or believe it is worth it to keep it because of that future flexibility and other options that he does open up by bringing on the roster? As we know with the NBA, that sometimes in trades, it has more to do with the salary than anything with talent, and I do think that the Sixers are lacking those amount of contractual options, that we've seen how much is tied to the Joel Embiids, the Tyrese Maxeys, how much money is going to be tied up in that you have to have a decent chunk of salary that is flexible to be moved. So I think you can kind of accomplish both goals by bringing in OG Anunoby on this type of deal. Let me know if you agree with me in the comments. Please make sure that you are smashing that subscribe button to keep the Sixers Digest growing. I do appreciate each and every one of you that is tuning into these videos. Drop a like on it to let me know that you are listening. Appreciate each and every one of you once again, and talk with you next time right here on Sixers Digest.